You're listening to The Hidden Chasm, a discussion of how tech debt and legacy solutions become barriers to growth and innovation for established SaaS companies. The Hidden Chasm is sponsored by United Effects, where our purpose is to help companies break free from legacy tech, improve retention, and empower M&A growth. Learn more at unitedeffects.com. Welcome to another episode of The Hidden Chasm, which you have to say with that deep voice. We've been exploring the chasm from a lot of different angles. We've spoken to M&A advisors. We've spoken to product executives. We have some technology folks coming up soon as well. We've had the people angle, which has been really interesting. But I think one of the most important elements of any business is revenue. Otherwise, you don't really have a business. And to help explore this particular angle is our friend and actually board advisor. Welcome, Jenna Watson-Brawn. Jenna is a 15-year veteran of business development. I'm reading this. I always have to read. Jenna is a 15-year veteran of business development, sales, and growth coaching with proven successes leading enterprise sales as a senior executive. She now focuses her energy and experience on helping early-stage companies find product market fit, gain traction, and build revenue. She is currently the founder of Jenna Watson-Brawn Consulting, affiliated with several accelerators, and board advisor to several companies, including United Effects. Welcome, Jenna.
Thank you very much. Excited to be here.
Well, we're excited to have you. Obviously, Jenna, you've been working with us for a while now. And it's funny, for our listeners, it's always funny when we have to do some digging on people we already know to figure out how these conversations are going to go. As I dug into your past a little bit and saw your experiences in enterprise sales with Event-Base and then Motive and then moving into your coaching career now, just a really fascinating journey. I'm sure a lot of people would be interested in hearing more about it. And I thought, why don't just kick things off is tell us about yourself and how you found yourself on this call with us.
Yeah. And I always say, I didn't take the easy path. And I think once you get a taste of the startup world, it's really hard to let go. So I joined my first startup when I was 19, employee, I think 9 or 10, first salesperson working alongside the CEO, and was there for 10 years. And I joke that yes, it was one company. It had a couple different names over the years, but it was actually 5 different companies because at every different phase that we were at, whether it was bootstrapping, pivoting into enterprise, raising our first VC, raising subsequent VC, it was an entirely different company with entirely different challenges, and executives and board members and all of that evolved greatly. So that was where I really cut my teeth in sales, selling to the likes of SAP, Microsoft, Charles Schwab, really with not much experience and having to be self-taught in a lot of ways. My background's actually in accounting, which I don't think you guys knew.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so I like numbers. So I've always liked numbers. I like algebra. I don't like bigger things than algebra, but I like you sell this many of this and you get X. That's my perfect kind of math. So that's where I started. And then over time ended up taking over sales, leading customer success. So understanding both pieces of that as well, of not just getting that sale, but keeping that sale and growing that customer, which I think gives me a unique perspective on the importance of good fit customers, the importance of true product market fit. I've heard, don't know who to credit, but I believe product market fit actually comes in the renewal, not in the sale, because a good salesperson can get just about anything sold, whether or not you need it or want it. And product market fit is actually in the renewal. Did you find enough value in that first or second or third year of the product to renew? So that's my background. That was the beginning of my enterprise and sales career. And then after that, moved on to a couple other startups, Motive being one of them, in a completely different space, back to the small scale, scrappy team, taking out the garbage, trying to do big deals with the likes of Fortune 10 companies, and made some excellent progress there. But it's I think building something from nothing and finding people with the problem that you can solve for them that they want solved is like the thing I look for in all my work. And so now I help startups and I'm starting to work more with little bit further, companies a little bit further along, like, 5-10 million in revenue. But it's how do we build a sales motion, scalable or not, that is going to build the company in a way that is not cutting off your nose to spite your face.
Interesting. Well, first of all, backing up a little
Yeah.
bit. So you started at 19.
Yeah.
I was definitely not thinking about business or
Yeah.
anything really at 19.
Yeah. And it
That,
was it was a total fluke, like a kind of friend of a friend. Oh, do you want to work here? And I had another job, and the husband of the owner of the company said, "Oh, I really like you. Like, would you be open to trying sales? I think you'd be really good at
wow.
it." And that's literally how it happened. And then like I worked alongside the CEO. I was like, "Okay, let's build this." I would say I've always like I came out this way. So it sales was a natural tendency for me, and I've always been entrepreneurial. Like even when I was 18, when social media first came out, even younger than that. And like businesses were trying to figure out how do you monetize. Like I did my own little consulting on the side and was helping companies set up Twitter accounts. And so I've always had that in me. But yeah, like I officially embarked on, and the first, I think, 5 years of my startup world was bootstrapped. And so we were profitable and we were selling to the likes of SAP, and really, really big companies with no marketing, no sales, no VC. So I know it's possible. I know it's possible. And I think that's where I can rub some people the wrong way, because I don't believe that you need all the flashy stuff to
Yeah.
get off the ground.
Well, I think that's been something, as Josh and I have worked with you, that resonated with me is the let's just try this and see if that
Yeah.
works. It's pragmatic
Yes.
and practical, which I love over, theory and process, which is funny because I'm a fan of process, but I think as opposed to something that's dogmatic and,
Yeah.
and thinking through, actual steps that work. As you've sort of moved through your career, so you started with startups, you then ended up in enterprise, and then you're back to
Yeah.
startups. Would you say, how did the enterprise world influence how you coach startups now?
Yeah. I think with the enterprise world, what you learn is that you have to play by their rules. Like you have to play by the end customer's rules. And when you're selling to Microsoft and you're selling $2-3 million of business a year, doesn't really matter what you think or what you want or how you want the sales process to go. It doesn't matter in the same way that I think some startups think it does. Like, oh, I'm going to build this sales motion and I'm just going to do it. And that's the way it's going to go. It's like, yeah, but that's not how Microsoft buys. So I think it gave me a very deep and thorough understanding of um, meeting customers where they are. And if you're selling to the enterprise and you're trying to do a lightweight PLG motion, but you're selling to a SVP at Microsoft, those two things don't work together. I don't believe in a sales motion for a sales motion. I believe in matching sales motions to the buyer, the way they typically buy, their expectations. So I think it's given me a really big empathy for the buyer, and I think it's dispelled some of the myths of build it and they will come. Because I think a lot of startups, we had this conversation just earlier today, think that building the product is the hardest part of building a startup. And I can, without a shadow of a doubt, say that that is not true.
You mentioned PLG,
Yes.
doing product-led growth, right?
Yes. Yes.
And
Thank you.
that is a continuing trend even now. And I guess you would say that that as much as folks certainly love to jump on the bandwagon and say it could be a panacea for getting your startup off the ground, you would say, hold on, wait 1 second. Let's take a look at exactly who those buyers are first and whether or not PLG is even a fit.
Yes. I think they say with PLG, and I don't, this is a stat that kind of people have different versions of. Like, if your product doesn't give them an aha moment within the first 5 minutes of using it, you should not do PLG. And if your product, like think of Calendly, great example, put your credit card in, sign up, freemium, whatever, however you've come to Calendly, free trial. You try it, you send out your first meeting, you're like, oh my gosh, someone booked a meeting. I didn't have to go back and forth. That's incredible. There wasn't a stakeholder group to decide whether Calendly is the right fit. It didn't integrate with your architecture. It didn't need a security review. Like, but then when people say, oh, I'm going to take this like highly specialized enterprise security product and put it with PLG, it's like, well, that's not how the CISO buys. The CISO doesn't, A, there's no aha moment in 5 minutes. B, the price point is such that they're not entering in their credit card information. And C, that's not how this purchase gets made. It's not an individual user using an individual tool. So of course there's exceptions to everything, but so often I see founders say, oh, I like this sales process or I like this market. I'm going to go after it. But completely ignoring who actually wants the product, who has the demand to solve the problem, and how do they typically buy? How do they typically interact with vendors and the realities of the product you're selling?
It's funny because Josh and I have gone back and forth on product led growth a lot as well. And you're right. It sounds so amazing.
Mm-hmm.
It's like this, yeah, let's do that. And then you get into it and you're like, oh, that didn't work. That seems like one common misconception. Are there other common misconceptions and challenges you see early stage companies face pretty often?
One of the big misconceptions is around, like, I just need to show you the product. And if I show you the product, you'll be ready to, like, that's all I need to do. And like, I'm going to do a demo and I'm just going to show you the product and then that will happen. And it depends on the vertical and the industry and the segment, all of those things of what you're selling into. Cause there are some products that the sales cycle is 1 call, 2 calls, 3 days. But in most cases, the discovery demo portion is really about solving problems. And you go back to the, old adage of bad salespeople just showing you every feature when you care about one feature. And if you don't know what that one feature is because you didn't ask the right questions, well, you've just wasted 45 minutes for someone because they saw 90% of the things they didn't need to see. And then somewhere in there, you kind of skimmed over the one thing they really care about. So I think that's one of them is that, oh, I'm just going to show you the product and that's it. And it's like, no, you actually need to understand this individual buyer, this individual organization, their specific needs. Again, that varies segment to segment because you may have a very homogeneous customer base, in which case there's more things you can rely upon between conversations. The other that I would say is that the founder can pass it off. I see it all the time. Oh, I'm going to hire sales help. And I'm going to hire sales help that is going to be a salesperson for me. And I've never seen it succeed, both in startups I've worked with and in startups that I've seen from afar. Hiring a salesperson too early usually does far more harm than good. And until you know what works, you cannot hire someone to do it for you. If you have a founder, like a co-founder that is a sales expert, that's different. But if that person is not part of your founding team, I see it all the time. You hire an SDR or you hire an account executive, but you don't know what works. So you're kind of trying to coach this person to figure out what could work in a sales motion. And I've just seen it fail 10 times out of 10 times. Like I'm yet to see that succeed before you probably, I would say, like until you have like 10 happy customers, maybe 5 to 10 happy customers.
Speaking of challenges, for our listeners, as we've been digging into this hidden chasm concept, Jenna's actually been a key component of that. She's been behind the scenes helping us make heads or tails of what we've been learning and thinking through some of these concepts as well. So you're not new to this, Jenna. It would be interesting to maybe in your own words, if you could sort of maybe take a second and a swing at what is the hidden chasm.
Yeah, and I'm going to take a sales lens on it because I've been in these rooms more times than I'd like to say. To me, the hidden chasm is the brick wall that an organization, usually an executive team, hits once they've kind of not like they're in the middle of the chasm, they hit this brick wall. And a lot of the times the brick wall comes in the form of disappointing customers. And that could be disappointing customers who asked for a feature and another year has rolled around and you made a commitment and the feature is not yet built. And what you're hearing from the architecture or the technical team is like, we can't do this. It's going to incur so much cost. Or it's the case that you have been building and building and building, and the things that the customers are experiencing are breaking. When it's been taken seriously and when I've really felt in the chasm as a part of an executive team is when you're disappointing customers, and disappointing customers with your product, not with customer service or pricing, but the product either not doing something they need it to do, or not following through on commitments that you've made. Or in the case of, we have this innovative new idea, your top customer, it's a great idea, everyone agrees. You go back to the development team and they say, oh yeah, that's going to take 2 years. And I've been there. The tension between the growth, and especially if you've taken on significant venture capital, the growth, the commitments to the board for growth, and the technical realities of what you can do for your customers. So I think that's the first, because never ever has that happened. And this has been a surprise to the technical team. Like, they've seen this coming for 16, 18, 20 months of, we're going to hit this wall, we're going to hit this wall, we have to fix it. But usually, and I've been a culprit, growth, 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 growth. I'm reporting into a board to hit my numbers for my team. And I am going to just keep pushing. And in a lot of the cases, the CEO is also just going to keep pushing the technical team to build and build and build. And then you end up with a house of cards that that small breeze comes in and you're left in a dark hidden chasm.
So much to say there. So I know, Bo, you have more to say. But when you get to that point where you suddenly realize, oh, too many broken promises here happening, or what are you saying it's going to take 2 years, tech developers? Has there ever been a translation layer around you at that time? Because whenever I'm not,
Yeah.
I'm technical, but I'm not that technical. I've been in many rooms where I've been with business folk asking, why is it going to take this long? And the answer I get, I cannot decipher. I don't even know what they're saying. But
Yeah.
like, if you don't have that translation layer who's saying, hey, okay, if we defer now because the incentive structure is towards growth and we're deferring the problem, I just want you all to know that when we hit it, and we're going to hit it, and this is what it's going to look like, you're going to have the aha moment that, oh, okay, we realize how we got here. Does that happen? Or is it more like, wait, why is this happening? What's going on now? Like, does that make sense?
It does. I would say a good analogy is someone who like eats McDonald's for lunch 3 times a week. And it's like their
You got
doctor
me.
saying, I had a feeling
Yeah,
you just look like a McDonald's
I
junkie.
am.
So it's like your doctor saying to you, like, you're gonna have a heart attack. Like, you're going to have a heart attack if you eat McDonald's every 3 days a week. You're going to have a heart attack. I would say in some organizations and in times of others, there has been that translation layer. There's been that incredibly business centric VP of engineering or CTO, and they have been able to say, hey, this is going to be the repercussion of the decisions that you're making. We're prioritizing X instead of Y. And this is going to come. But just like we've seen with people, until you actually have the heart attack, it is very hard to change behavior based on, like, we devalue that future so much that current, in the case of McDonald's, like, oh, I really want a Big Mac, overrides any value of the future. The other thing that I think comes into play, which is hard, and I've seen this many times, is there's also a resentment that builds between the business side and the technical side of the organizations. So when you do hit that brick wall, I also think that is a hard part, because you have the technical team being like, told you so. Like, what did you guys think was going to happen? And again, then even if you have this incredibly business centric CTO, they're then dealing with a very unhappy team because this thing that they said was going to happen happened. Nobody's winning. And now, it just changes the mood, I would say. And I do think that kind of thing matters, because then you have two teams against each other instead of one team collectively working together. But I've had those excellent CTOs, and we still ran fast toward that brick wall. I think wherever possible, I've seen, the really smart technical people picking off little pieces here and there to kind of prevent the brick wall from being quite as hard and quite as severe. But almost always it takes that heart attack for people to actually clue in.
It's interesting. So I think maybe stepping back a little bit, because I think hindsight is 2020, right?
Yes.
And you can look back at this and analyze it. And you're describing something very similar to what others on the show have described in terms of that journey to the wall, basically, or to chasm in this case. We could have called it the hidden wall. But in that moment, I guess I'm curious about one of the things I think that would be helpful is to the listeners and in general is, how in emotional intelligence books, they talks about actively being aware of what's happening.
Yes.
And helping, and maybe somebody who was in or is in the position you were in, helping them think through the immediate reactions. So in that moment, as you said, you weren't thinking about, oh, this is going to be a problem. You were reacting in the moment to however the situation was unfolding. So thinking back to that, I'm curious, like, what was your first instinct? So when somebody said, and you heard them say, we're going to have a problem, and and obviously in hindsight it was one, but
Yes.
in that moment, knowing that you had the numbers that you were trying to hit that month, knowing, and maybe there was some, and there were other KPIs maybe that were happening. I don't know if there was any blame on sales as well. What was going through your mind in that moment, as opposed to sort of reflecting on it now?
Yeah. I think if I'm being completely honest, in that moment, because this is not an isolated incident, but when that has happened to me, and who else can I talk to?
Okay.
And I think we get into that pattern of, when we don't like the answer, this is me being completely honest,
Yeah.
we replace the technical people, because we think this is a people problem. We don't think it's a technical problem. Like, we don't truly understand the magnitude. And so I think that was always my first instinct of, well, like, who else could give me a different answer in that might, which tells you exactly why we ended up in this position, the problem kind of perpetuating, right? Because there's always someone within an organization that will give you the answer that that you want to hear. So I think, like, in my most reactive state, that would have been what I would say. I think in, like, taking a deep breath and counting to 10, I would have seen, going back into that situation, I think the key piece is that I wish I had done is expanding the time horizon. And I think that's
Okay.
the culprit for a lot of these problems, is when the time horizon is too short, and when the KPIs are quarter to quarter, month to month, when the board is, looking at metrics on a very short time horizon, you end up doing things that are really going to hurt you down the road. And from a financial perspective, that does matter, because your lifetime value of a customer decreases dramatically. If you have a customer for 3 years instead of 7 years, that's pretty big deal. So I think I wish I had expanded the time horizon. And I think as a leadership team, that's a really good way to think about things. And I think in startup world, that's hard, because you're usually working on a short time horizon. But just zooming out a little bit, I would have been able to see, okay, this is worth fixing now, because yes, it will make the customer unhappy for, this quarter, this year, maybe we'll even lose them. but
Hmm.
that means I'm not going to lose the other 10 customers that we're acquiring right now because we're going to solve this problem today. And in a year, the problem will be solved. So I think that was a big piece, was just how small the time horizons and the results.
And a lot of that comes back to just, what is your 3 to 5 year strategy, right?
And in a startup, I don't know, and I think it happens at different phases, but when you've been bootstrapped and you've
Yeah.
been, can we make payroll? Can we grow? Can we hire for 5 years? You raise VC, like there does have to be a very intentional shift in the time horizons that you look at. And I think that continues to happen as the organization grows from 10 to 100 million, 100 to 200 million. um, Maybe the time horizon it's not the only thing, but I know that we can get trapped in thinking what got me here is going to get me out of this. And that's, I think, that the big trap that I've seen sales teams fall into, I've seen executive leadership teams fall into, is we just need to do more faster instead of saying we need to do this differently.
One incentive that you mentioned, and I like the that you looked at it from a top down, is like what influences the incentive structures of the other departments is that short time horizon. Are there any other incentives that you see um, in mid-sized enterprise organizations having to scale and grow rapidly? Are there any other incentives that you see that is influencing the outcome towards this brick wall, this chasm?
Hiring, I think, is an incentive. Growing teams quickly. I've never met a manager that doesn't want a bigger team,
Hmm.
or I've met very few managers that don't want a bigger team. And for every 8 people, you should have another manager. Like it's, and I think then you need to give everyone work, and then you need to give everyone revenue. And I think that is, besides just revenue targets, commission structures, compensation packages for executives, I think that is kind of an underlying piece, is like people's individual career progression. And I want to become a manager. You've had someone in the same role for 3 years. You want them to become a manager. You want their team to grow. So I think that, especially in the startup world where people go into it to learn and grow quickly, I think that's an underlying current that pushes us faster towards the hidden chasm.
That's really interesting. I mean, yeah, so scaling out your team too quickly. I'm curious, when you one of the things we sort of thought might be happening, and you'd be in a good position to tell us, is there any blowback on the sales organization before or after these things begin to happen as well?
A
Um,
million percent. Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
like livelihood, like you think you have a sales rep that's used to making 250 to $500,000 a year, and you're telling them, "Hey, I'm going to say no to this $1 million contract because we can't fulfill, whatever product obligations, or this customer is going to churn." Like, you very meaningfully are impacting their quality of life. And maybe it's not even that dramatic. Like, maybe they're not a sales rep making $1 million. Maybe they're a sales rep making, $150,000 as the sole breadwinner for their family. And you're
yeah.
telling them, hey, we're going to say no to this deal because we can't fulfill on the product promise that we made 6 months ago that we're going to fulfill. Like there is a very um, real impact on compensation that I think is also very different to the engineering organization, because the developer gets paid the same, kind of whether or not they do the thing or don't do the thing, or do it well or don't do it well. Yes, there's other pieces and things, but a sales rep, not to say it's better, but they have more to lose. So I think that's also why you get the sales teams are much louder and are willing to fight much harder. And I think that also perpetuates the cycle, because you have a very loud sales team because their money is literally on the line, and you're overpowering an engineering team that, you know, is kind of saying like, hey, we're going to hit a brick wall. We're going to hit a brick wall. Especially for a company that's not public, like liquidity, like that's stuff is still so far out, that unless you're immediately, close to a raising a secondary round where people can get out, or an IPO. But in most cases, what people take home today is the
Yeah.
thing that matters to them. And you have a very, very loud sales organization.
I mean, it comes back to what you were saying. It's a misalignment. Well, maybe that's a strong term, but it's certainly a competing.
Competing. Yes.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
competing incentive structure, which maybe there's something there to look at, because if I don't know that developers and the R&D organization should be incentivized the same way as sales, but they're skin in the game.
They're in conflict. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a much higher risk reward scenario in terms of compensation for sales than there is
Yeah.
with R&D. It's really interesting.
And that's where like sales leadership and that longer time horizon, that 3 to 5 year or 1 to 3 year time horizon matters. Because if your sales leader understands that and can, set the right expectations with the team and kind of keep them off that hamster wheel altogether, and work very closely with product and engineering to be in lockstep, the likelihood of that happening is so much lower. But I would say in a lot of cases, you have these sales organizations that are very financially driven, that can drive the company in a direction that doesn't serve it over the long term.
Have you ever been involved with a company like this where you made strides out of the chasm, or have you found it to be more of a if you're in it, this is going to be a long haul scenario?
I think I've definitely worked with companies making strides out. I think that, I mean, the problem with the chasm is you get out ish, but there's always like the next chasm is kind of always
Yeah.
coming, right? So I think I've seen partially the other side, but I won't say I've seen an organization like completely
Bridge the
do a
divide.
bridge the divide. Once you've replatformed, there's the next thing, or there's M&A, or like it's just a cycle.
Going back to one of the points you were making was the mistrust that can form between sales, product and dev, and really, I would imagine the executive committee and the board. And I guess it's such a prevalent thing because, like you said, there's all of these misalignments. There's confusion about what the problem actually is. There's disbelief. How could we possibly be in this situation? Let me speak to your manager.
Yeah.
And so, what would you say? Because I think that's probably the biggest killer, right? The moment that happens, um, the problem is 10 times harder than it was the day before, because
Yeah.
now you've got to work together. And now you're thinking through hindsight, or maybe having seen it be addressed. What are some recommendations you might make, especially between sales and the engineering organization? Because I think that to me has always felt so out of sync in a lot of these companies. And I know that me and Josh, I would not speak for you, but I suspect you would agree. I've been in the role where it's like, I just want to talk to the salesperson, like, can we figure this out? And
Yeah.
that for some reason is always very difficult.
I think a key is actually starts at the CEO. I think the CEO or the president of the company needs to reset the tone and reset some of the incentives, and whether they're specific incentives like compensation, or they're just expectation setting, because what I've seen is the CEOs want it all. They want to
Mhm.
fulfill the customer need in the short term, and they want to have the long-term technical plan. And so I think, what if the CEO can come into reality, address reality, and say, these are the short-term pains we're all going to feel to get us to this new, better, wonderful, brighter future, and lay that out. I think that gives a more fertile ground for the head of the technical side, whether it's a CTO, and the head of sales or revenue, to collaborate, because that is the piece. Like, you have to be willing to make short-term sacrifices, and both sides need to make short-term sacrifices for the long-term better future. So it's 1 + 1 = 3, in that the engineering and the sales team both need to be grounded in the same version of reality, and they need to have confidence that they are both not going to be asked to fulfill every short-term commitment and every long-term commitment that the CEO has or the board has set forth, because that is where it is impossible to do that without a massive injection of capital or resources or other external factors changing. So I think everyone needs to be on board. Like, we're going to take our medicine now. This is what the
Mm-hmm.
medicine's going to look like. It's not just the sales team taking their medicine. It's not just engineering taking their medicine. We are all going to take our medicine. This is what it looks like. And this is why. This is the 1, 2, 3 year plan. But when I've seen the onus fall entirely on one team to sacrifice in the short term, I think
Yeah.
it does a lot of damage when it comes to morale. It does a lot of damage.
And as part of that medicine taking, have you seen something I don't know how to describe as the per customer feature demands versus the more broad what is the benefit of implementing this uh, in the entire product in a way that benefits the business in the long term? That
Yes.
tension where the short term thinking was paying off, you were converting leads faster, but you were incurring more debt because you were building so many one offs for specific customers.
Yeah, and that's the crux of it, right? And I've been there with it when it's a habit to break. And I think in my experience, like whether you have a customer advisory board or you have a key of a group of customer advisors, you need to be transparent and get them on board with the plan. Because if they can also see, thinking of your biggest key customers, why you're going to be saying no in the short term to some of the things that you used to not say no to, and what that long-term payoff is for them. And if that long-term payoff and that 1, 2, 3 year plan addresses their needs, I've seen that work. And I've personally had those conversations with executives and with board members of, okay, we're going to say no now. And I'm sorry, it's going to be really uncomfortable. I know it's going to put you in a hard spot, but this is why. And I mean, obviously working with the team to see if there's anything that you can do that kind of gives them a little bit of a cookie, like, okay, whether that's pricing, whether that's
Right.
something else they want, but then enrolling them. And this is making sure that what you're building is going to address them in the long term. I would also say in some cases, you may just have a bad fit customer and you've been bringing them along and they've been costing way more than they're worth. It is never worth keeping a bad fit customer. And so that would be, hey, customer, like, this isn't working, whether that's because of the customer's demands, whether that's because of the customer's use cases, maybe they're using the product in a very different way, but having that very open and transparent conversation and trying to like kill that dead weight, those are two things that I've seen help, to then give you the breathing room that you need on the engineering side to not be constantly putting out fires and to instead be building.
I don't even know if this exists, but to be able to have some sort of KPI or measurement of dead weight per customer.
I was going to say, how often? I don't know that happens as often as it should. Is probably the right way to put that. But that's interesting. It's tricky because I think as you're working with these startups from on their journey from 0 to, like, let's say 5 million, so much of that
Yeah.
is opportunistic sales, right? And it's, yeah, you have a vision, but that vision might need to change, and so you're doing the thing out of necessity that you hope you don't keep doing after some point. And there's this transition moment, which is probably very difficult to say, well, when you get here, stop doing that. Where the things have helped you be successful all of a sudden start to lead to some toxicity. It's got to be fascinating from your perspective, because in your work with these early stage companies, and I would imagine you probably see this most in that 5 million category. Like, are you seeing things where you're just like, okay, this is good for now, but man, that's probably going to be a problem later?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the biggest one is relying on personal networks. I think
Yeah.
that's the
Okay.
biggest one. Like you hire a sales rep or you hire two sales reps and they have really extensive personal networks and they've built your first few $1 million of sales through their personal networks. But there are some exceptions, but in most cases, you've actually not proven that you have a sales motion that works. You've proven that if people get to know about your product, they want to buy your product. So I think that's one for sure in that, like, I'd say like $2 to $5 million range. Of course, you can look at the renewal numbers on that, and that will give you a better indication of like, is there true product market fit there? But I've seen that a lot of just relying on personal networks. And anytime you have a single point of failure, especially when that person isn't a founder, I would say it's different if it's a founder because that
Yeah.
network couldn't go anywhere. That's a big one. I would say more often, though, I see people trying to scale sooner than they should.
Hmm.
That's actually the way bigger problem is people with one or two customers trying to then build this super scalable sales process or planning documents or opportunity criteria. Or even at a few $1 million, they're like, oh, we need to hire this big sales team. And it's a crawl, walk, run. It is not a crawl, run. So I think that is more often people skipping steps of, okay, we did a whole bunch of things that aren't scalable. Now let's peel some of those off. Let's keep doing some of the ones that are most critical, but what do we think we can do that is scalable? And then adjusting that instead of taking a band-aid and ripping it all off at once because you can't troubleshoot and you can't tweak. And then you're just left with this, well, we had all these sales and now we have no sales, or we have less than we thought. What do we do? And it's like, well, you've changed 65 variables at one time. So I think that is more often the issue that I see.
Yeah, it's like you want to stand behind the wave so you can see it and adjust. Because if you say, okay, I'm just stand in front of it and build this huge, invest all of this money because I'm connecting two dots and creating a straight line somewhere. Well, you can't see the
Yeah.
wave anymore, and if something changes, well, you've
Yeah.
expanded based on a perception of like a trajectory that is not always in a flat line up and to the right. So
You talked a little bit about that change starts with the CEO, and you gave some examples of things that they should be doing to help when these things happen or when they find themselves in the chasm. Do you have any thoughts in terms of practical advice for a CRO or even a CTO or CPO who may find themselves in this situation?
I would so I think there's two tendencies. There's one to stop the bleeding and then get to the root cause. And I think most people stop the bleeding and they
Yeah.
say, okay, we've stopped the bleeding. I'm going to kind of continue forth. I think stopping the bleeding and then getting to the root cause. I think looking at your people, like a lot of the times, the people that got you into a situation aren't the people that will get you out of it. Like it's a
Hmm.
sad truth. There are some people that are really good at startups, and I would say myself included. Like I'm not a $2 billion salesperson. Like that is not my wheelhouse. And there are people that are really good at getting you to $100 million or $50 million that are not going to be able to get you where you need to go next. So I think that is hard. It doesn't mean that they are to be redundant, like to be taken out, but how do you bolster them with people that have been on this path forward? So I think it's adding executives, adding advisors of people that have done this portion of the journey that you're about to do next, and also looking at vendors that have done this portion of the journey that you're doing next, because again, you don't want to be at 50 million and look to a $1 billion CEO and say, okay, you're going to be my mentor. How do I get to a billion? It's finding the right people that have done that 50 to $250 million journey, because that's the journey you're on. Who can help with that, whether it's adding to your executive team, adding to your board, adding to your advisors, working with vendors that have done that portion of the journey. I think that's often overlooked, because if everyone around you has only ever gotten to 50 million,
Yeah.
the chances that you're going to, like, who can help, who can you learn from? Of course, adding your own flavor, adding your own spin. You're not looking for a playbook per se, but a guide or people that can help you avoid some of the common pitfalls.
What about in a scenario where maybe there is attention being finally given to the platform, the product? I'm sure from a sales perspective, if you're somebody who's tasked with bringing in revenue, and all of a sudden you're being told that your product is going under major refactoring or things like that, that can feel scary, right? Do you have any thoughts in terms of maintaining the sales momentum in an environment where everything is in flux like
Yeah.
this?
So I would say two things. One, find more, like, you always have a pocket of happy customers, and maybe
Mhm.
the customers are using only 75% of the product, or they're really focused on a specific use case or feature, or they moved from a certain competitor and they moved to your product and they're just thrilled. And maybe they're 20% of your customers. Find more like them and incentivize the sales team to find more like them. So while your product is going under major overhaul, don't try and find more customers that are disgruntled or upset or wanting it to be different, waiting for those new features. Find more customers that are happy with it as it is today, and that the new features will help in the future. So kind of gearing the sales efforts, the marketing efforts, the events, the everything, all the activations you're doing to give them the best shot of success at customers that will be happy with the product while it goes through this transition. I think that's number one. Number two is, this is where the engineering team, technical team, product team needs to put on their sales hats.
Yeah.
Sell this vision to the sales team. Like, it is your job to get the sales team on board with where you're going. And if it was a good plan and if it was well thought through, you've taken customer feedback, you've listened to customers. So there is something for them to get excited about, but it is your job to enroll the sales team in what you're doing so that they can say, okay, little uncomfortable right now, but in a year, I'm going to be able to sell 2x my average contract value because we're integrating a new product or because we're rolling out this new feature. Help them understand how it's going to help them make more money.
That's so interesting, because a big part of, when I speak to technologists, architects, developers, a big conversation we eventually end up having is how to talk business effectively, right? I think it's a really important piece of product development leadership to teach your technical resources how to speak to the business in and of itself in order to have that conversation, exactly what you're saying, and know that, well, I think it would be really cool isn't a good reason. And, oh, you're going to lose a lot of money if you don't. Maybe is a better one.
And we need to do it. That's a terrible reason as well. But if you can explain the potential revenue benefits, the potential new features and products, and this is going to take your annual contract value from, $75,000 to $115,000 because we're adding these widgets. We heard from 80% of customers that they want it. That's a totally different conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. The context that you like what you're doing now, sales, but here, let me tell you what the possibilities are, where you could be and what you could be achieving with this time, which may not be pleasant this time, but this
Yes.
time that we need to invest.
Yes. And then the other piece is, like, how is the executive team engaging with customers? Because that goes a long way. And when you're going to be pissing off a customer, like, I'm thinking, let's say you're doing a M&A, you're acquiring another key product in the space, and you're going to integrate that product into your product. But it means it's going to be clunky for a little bit, and they're going to be upset. Well, a call from your CEO or a call from someone explaining the vision, explaining the value, and explaining what they're going to get out of it at the end goes a really long way.
So that's an important piece, because it's a question for me, actually. So I'll ask you I've seen this happen, which is the company is in the midst of, they know what they've been doing isn't working all of a sudden. And so a reaction to that is what, I guess you could call like visionary syndrome. somebody sits down and comes up with this brand new concept of how everything is going to be different and looks completely different. They might even invest in somebody to come in and draw up what this whole new vision of is going to look like. And most of the time, I mean, it's great. It's an amazing idea, and maybe and in many ways it may address the business and market issues, although it certainly wouldn't immediately address the technical issues that have led them there. But it is also somewhat divorced from the reality of their current scenario. And it's like, well, you're trading the hardships of your existing reality with the hardships of a reality that doesn't even exist yet. And then they go out and start trying to sell that, which from a startup perspective is like, well, that makes sense. You're selling something before you build it so that you can get paid to build it. From an enterprise perspective, I don't know if it feels very risky, but maybe that, I don't know. I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, risky is a really, really good term to use. I think there's a balance. There is getting a little ahead of your skis, selling something that's coming. But the enterprise needs to be excited about what they have today. So it will not exempt you from users reporting bugs on your platform. That doesn't help necessarily. It can buy you more credibility and more time. But it is absolutely a balance. And I think too often people unveil this entire new version of their product all at once. And I for the enterprise specifically, like I was speaking with a customer the other day, and they have a SaaS tool and they changed the color of something and someone complained. They changed the color from blue to white. And someone complained because they were used to it being blue and it is now white. It is still incredibly legible. It was like a decoration. It was not actually a key piece of the UI. So I think these visionary moments, people think, oh, I'm going to unveil this entirely new thing. And, we can think of some SaaS tools that the three of us use where they unveil the new menu and all at once. And while it's maybe better for us in the long term, like that was a hard adjustment to make. So, of course, there'll be some things that you need to do all at once, but I would say too often it's like, oh, 3.0, we're going to take everything and blow it up and make it different and better, is often not the solution. And the solution is more iterative.
The delta between what is now and all the muscle memory that people have to know what is now, all the comfort they have, even if it's terrible, they've gotten it to work. They figured it out. And the delta between that and the new thing, that's change that needs to be designed. And it's often not designed. Yes. The new thing's designed, but the path and the journey to handhold someone to the new thing, that's often missed.
Yeah. And it's the same with entering a new market. Like we're going to go up market. We're going to go down market. Okay, great. And you have a sales team that is an expert in one market. And now you think you're going to apply it to a new market. Or we're going to integrate, we're a SaaS tool that is $150,000 a year. We're bought a competitor that's $5,000 a year. And now we're going to try and integrate it all together. I think the vision is important and the vision is there, but the connection, like strategy in action, I think is the critical piece that often gets missed. And then you end up with a bungled, half-baked, not on time, frustrated situation. And that's where you get these customers that are sitting on legacy tech for years and years and years because they won't move to the latest version because it doesn't meet their needs.
It's another version of the build it and they will come fallacy you were talking about. It's just a much more expensive version.
Absolutely.
I think we covered a ton of ground. This was really cool. Jenna, thank you so much for making this time. Want to open up the mic to you here. Spotlight is on you. Anything you want to plug or talk about, go ahead. Let everybody know.
I would say feel free to reach out if anyone listening to this wants to talk more about startup sales. But if I could put it on a billboard, and I'm going to put it on this billboard now, please, please, please don't hire sales too early. You need to be able to repeatably sell yourself as a founder. If you cannot repeatably sell yourself, you will never have luck with a salesperson. you need to learn to get good at sales. So I think for founders, that's what I'm going to leave you with. And then for any execs that are listening to this that are focused on kind of that 50 to 250 million, I'm in this stuck, like find people like Bo, like Josh, find people that have done this part of the journey before, because you will be far better off. And I think thinking what got you here will get you out of it is a hard path.
We really appreciate that plug. How would people reach out to you?
Great. Jenna Watson-Brawn on LinkedIn, or Jenna at jennawb.com is my email. So feel free to reach out there, but LinkedIn's also great.
Awesome. Well, this has been another episode of The Hidden Chasm. Thank you, and stay tuned for more. You've been listening to The Hidden Chasm, brought to you by United FX. If anything in our conversation resonated with you today, please reach out. We'd love to hear from you. Email us at podcast@unitedfx.com or simply visit us at unitedfx.com or thehiddenchasm.com. Thanks for listening.